but I want to talk about us, if I can. I want to talk about you and I. I want to talk about us as a church, us as the lower C capital, not capital, the lower C church in our context. And I want to talk about God, and I want to talk about His mission that He has given us, and I want to talk about His activity and movement that's with us and that we are supposed to be walking in. And so over the next few weeks, that's what I'm going to be diving into. And I really don't push sermon series. I really don't tell you, you better come to this one. But I really want you guys to be here for the next few weeks if you can, because it's so important for us, as we're going to learn today and we're going to talk about and really just kind of dive in today, understanding the vision and mission that God has given us in our own context, okay? Because honestly, God's mission is one thing, and it's in the Bible. But what we do is we can contextualize that mission and vision that He's given us for our community and for our specific people. And that's what we have done with this mission that we have. And just so we're clear at the get-go of this, mission and vision, I'm going to use those words interchangeably. I know there's some differences, and I'm not here to talk about those differences. So if you hear me say vision and mission, I'm really using these words as the same way. Our mission that you may see on a wall here, or you may hear us talk about every now and then, is to reach out, welcome, and moving forward. How many of you have heard or did you know that was our mission? Please raise your hand. This is, hold your hand. Please hold your hand up, all right? This is incredible, okay? This is, you can put your hands down. You may not have worn deodorant and you were waiting for me to tell you to put your hand down. This is exactly why, and I know we have some people traveling this weekend, but this is why it's so important that we all understand our mission as a church, because as you just noted, 5 people raised their hand. Okay? Now, let me give you a little background history on the mission of Refuge Point. 8 years ago, crazy, 8 years ago, almost to the day, 11 people, because 12 people sound so spiritual, and we're trying to copy the disciples. So we were 11 people because we'd already ousted Judas, right? We don't know who he was, but he just decided not to show up to these pre-planning meetings of the church. We decided that we were going to gather together because the Lord impressed on mine and Miranda's heart that we were going to plant a church in West Point. This was before Point was here. This was before, as the industry was growing in our area. Really, we had just watched the biggest idol industry just kind of collapse. And so we were kind of in this middle of God, I really don't understand this, and I'm really just kind of questioning you on this, like we're so human and we question God, which is so ridiculous, by the way. So we were we're going to plant this church because God had told us to do this. We began to meet with people, and we began to strategize. We have to have a mission. We want God to speak to us directly. What is God's mission for us specifically, in our specific context, as a church, in West Point, in LaGrange, in this whole surrounding area, in Lynette and Valley, what does that look like? What does that really look like? And as we were praying, and Miranda can attest to this because she was there, as we were praying, one of the ladies that was with us, that was helping us launch this church, who's now in heaven, not the actual heaven, but Colorado. That's also heaven, but she's there now. But she helped us plant this church, and she was our worship leader for several years. As we were praying, and it just snapped, and she's just like, "Hey, I believe the Lord spoke to me. This is what we're supposed to be doing." All right, didn't come from me, all right? Which I know everybody's going to tell you. The leader's got to tell you what your mission is. All right, I know that goes way against every leadership book you're going to read. But the Lord spoke, I believe, honestly spoke to Casey Easterwood, and she said, "This is our purpose because this aligns with what we're talking about, that we were to reach out, welcome in, and move forward." Now, spoiler alert, that's the Bible. I didn't know if you knew that or not. But that is communicated in a way that is contextual to who we are as a people. So that was at the forefront. We will reach out to every person. And in our community, that demographics is off the charts. It's white people, it's black people, it's Korean people, it's Hispanic people, it is poor people, and then one block over, it's middle-class people, and then there are wealthy people, and then there are people with no degrees, and there are people with higher education. And so God is speaking to us as a church, you're not just going to reach the white people, you're going to reach every people. Because at that point, we realized that this community didn't need another middle-class white church. Because if that was what God was telling us to start, then we wouldn't have started. We would have joined in with a lot of other white churches or African-American churches. So God was speaking to us, you're going to reach out to my people. And my people aren't the white people. But my people are all people. And God specifically began to speak to us to do that. He began to specifically say, and when you reach out to them, you're not just going to like reach out to them, do like drive-by reach outs or outreaches. You're going to actually welcome them into your community and your tribe here. And not only are you going to do that, but then you're going to grow in your faith together, because that's going to look really sticky, because now white people are growing in their faith with black people, because that's unheard of apparently in our community, and the poor people are going to be growing together with the wealthy people. And then that was at the forefront of our church. That's been our mission all along. And so we thought it'd be cute to paste it out there on the walls as you come in. I even got my picture on one of them. At least I'm not on a billboard, all right? I'm never going to be that pastor where I'm on a billboard. I swear to it, all right? If that ever happens, please leave this church. Before you slap me, then leave the church, okay? Like with me, like in a suit, like next to like some Rolls Royce, like please, like just leave the church, okay? Things have gone really bad, all right? Just want to let you know that for some reason. But we thought, well, hey, let's communicate it and let's put it on our walls so that when everybody comes through these walls, which all 5 of you have paid attention to, can see out there what the vision, the specific vision that God has given us, what that actually is. Now, it's one thing to see it out in the halls, okay? It's one thing to communicate it. It's one thing to actually know what it is, but here's my fear, and you just proved my fear. It's another thing that we're actually living it out, rallied behind it, unified behind that core mission that God has given us as a church to reach out, to welcome in, and to move forward. It's one thing to see it out there written down on a wall. It's one thing to talk about. It's one thing to see it on your R guide every week, which, by the way, it's been on your R guide, crying out loud. You didn't know that? You saw something cute we were saying? I mean, come on. That's anyway. And it's one thing to actually read that and say, oh, that's pretty cute. That's cool. It looks like every other church's vision or mission statement. But it's actually another thing for it actually to root deeply inside of us as believers who say that we belong to this community. Because there's the difference, I think, with a lot of churches. A lot of church may communicate their vision, but the people of God in that church, in that context, aren't actually living it out. And this is why it's so important that we as a church are living out this mission, because so many churches, they have abandoned their specific mission or vision that God has given them, and thus what you see in our area and in all across America are churches that are closing their doors every Sunday. And here's why. I'm going to read it to you. I want to read it to you out of the ESV first, God's version, and then I'll read it out of the CSB, which is a little bit easier to read. Proverbs 29:18, you could put it up on the screen. It says this: where there is no prophetic vision, the people cast off restraint, but blessed is he who keeps the law. Now, you can keep that up there if you can. I want to read it actually out of the Christian Standard Bible. This is kind of the translation I've been reading out a lot of. You can download it on your iPhone, because this says it really well, and actually it translates it better in the CSB. It says this: without revelation, people will run wild. All right, church going wild. You know why? There's no vision. There's no mission. Churches close doors. You know why? There's no vision. They've lost sight of their purpose that they have. There's another interchangeable word that I want to use also is purpose. Because this really isn't just about this church specifically. If you hear refuge, 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 then you're hearing the wrong thing, because actually God gives you a specific vision, a specific calling, a specific purpose for you to actually live out in your own personal lives. So this applies also to you as a believer. This applies to you as a father. This applies to you as a mother, as a parent, as a family member. This applies to you in your job. This applies to you in your school place, that God gives you a specific purpose and calling. And when you're not living that out, you do exactly what the Bible says. You just kind of run around, almost like what we used to say, like chickens with their head cut off. Now, I know that's like an illustration we don't use, because nobody's going to be cutting up some chickens these days. All right, most of you millennials are like, that's so disgusting. You know what I'm saying? Like, I understand. I get it. All right. All right, you're like, give me my coffee and avocado. I understand. Chicken's not of you, okay? The reason why it's so important and vital for our church to stay on mission and vision. I'm so sorry. I don't know what's wrong with me. I do know what's wrong with me. There's a lot of things wrong with me. Um, this is the reason why it's important for us to stay on vision and mission as a church, because um, this is how we define success. Now, I know when you say the word success in a church, that word gets a little sticky and muddy for some, because success for you may look different for success for someone else who's a part of a church, right? Success for some churches may be numerical growth. Success for some churches may be how many moving lights we can have at one time during one song. Successful church for some of you means how many, we measure it by different interesting things, and we define church ministries oftentimes by like how great the preacher is, how incredible the word was, like that word was on time for me. We describe like successful ministry as like how awesome the worship is, or how incredible the children's ministry is. But that's not how we define success here at Refuge Point. Because if we define success like that, you will leave very quickly, because there will be days that I'm just completely off, right? Perhaps that day may be today. There may be days when somebody didn't smile at you when you came in. There may be days when someone didn't put the Altoid in their mouth. There may be days where somebody didn't greet you like you think they should have. There may be days where we didn't have coffee, which, by the way, coffee's back, okay? There may be days, y'all act more spiritual and sanctified over coffee. Man, y'all wouldn't believe it. When we stopped serving coffee over the summer, like half the church left. All right, they're like, no part of this. All right? We define like success, and we measure success in all of these different ways. How much money can we have in our savings? That's success. How many people are we plugging into ministry? That's success. How many people are we plugging into small groups? That's success. But for us, that's not success. What success is for us is if we are staying on mission. That's what success is. Because in the end, really, success is such an interesting word. And I don't even like using that word because it gets really sticky and muddy. But in the end, Christ isn't going to look down on his church and say, hey, Church of West Point, how successful have you been? You think like when you end up in heaven, eventually one day, that God's going to say, hey, let's talk about your bank account. How successful were you at it? How successful were you at doing this thing and that thing? How successful was your ministry, Matthew? No, God is just going to ask us, he's going to welcome us in and say, well done, my faithful. And here's the problem with vision, that the reason why a lot of us can't stay on vision is because we just can't stay faithful to the calling that God has given us. Faithful, consistency, whatever you want to call it. The primary reason why churches die and they close doors every Sunday is because they just did not stay committed and faithful to the specific vision that God had given them contextually for their context and their community. So here's what we'll do. Like when mission isn't working, or when we're not staying on mission, when church isn't being successful like we think it should be, instead of us determining success how God determines success, we start, when we're not meeting the numbers, when we're not having X amount in the bank account, when we're not having this many people being plugged into ministry, here's what we do. We'll start adding things to it. We'll start adding programs. Because programs have saved the day. I mean, honestly, let's think about that for a second. If programs are what brings success to a church, then I would even conjure up this weird idea that Christ would have already returned, because everything would be fixed. Programs don't fix stuff. Programs don't mean better vision. Actually, most of the time, more programs just means more chaos. More programs is you saying that I don't need this vision, and so what programs does is it gives you the other part of the verse that says makes people just go run around wild and doing their own thing. That's what more programs do. The reason why we have more programs is because we're not staying faithful to what God has called us to do. Other killers of mission and visions of churches that I have observed in my young years is that we think we have to have some creative, some charismatic, some wonderful, eloquent, beautiful person speaking and being the preacher. We equate success as having this charismatic leader, and we think if we could have a charismatic leader, we'll be able to accomplish everything. But here's what I have witnessed in churches in America that have built their success and built their church around a personality. When that personality either gets caught in some moral failure or that person steps down, what happens to that church? It dies. It stays in ICU for a while and eventually dies. Listen to me very carefully. We will not, mark my words, we cannot build this church off of a personality. This is God's church. He's the personality. He's the one that we're building this thing upon. If it ever becomes about the preacher, if it ever becomes about the worship, if it ever becomes about a certain person in the church or some certain person wants to come up in this place, try to make it about themselves, if it ever does that, then lights out. Other killers of vision and missions that I've just witnessed in organizations and in churches is when mission or when churches compare their missions and visions to other churches. Let me break that down. That's one of the worst things you can do as a believer. Compare your specific calling that God has given you as a believer to someone else's. I will beat myself down if I am constantly comparing myself to the latest, greatest, big name preacher out there. I wouldn't even do this. I'd be like, I can't do this no more, Stan. It's all you, man. Just think about that in your own life, like the times where you are comparing yourself to other people's callings. Maybe it's jealousy, maybe because I want that calling, not the calling that God has given me. You'll never flourish in your faith if you're playing that compare and contrast game. Now listen, it's okay to learn from other churches. It's okay for us to say, let's learn from this church. But if we're comparing our church to some church that's blowing up 4,000 people, 5,000 the next week, if we're comparing our church to a 500 church, if we're comparing our church to every other church on the block, then we won't move any further than where we are right now. You won't move any further in your own life if you're always comparing yourself to other people. Well, my marriage isn't like that. Well, my kids aren't like that. Well, my calling isn't like that. Be comfortable and confident in the calling that God has given you. Listen, it's not really about your ability. It's just about the ability that God has given you and the power that He uses through you. Be confident in that. Be confident knowing that God has commissioned you and chosen you and called you and given you a specific purpose and calling. Be delighted in the fact that the God of the cosmos would step down and actually choose you. Like He picked you. Like He picked in West Point, Georgia, a town that at the time was dying, to bring a body of believers together and increase the church in this area. Like He picked us. And so this church, we can't move forward in our vision and mission if we're always comparing ourselves to other missions, other visions, other churches, other people's successes. Another thing that kills us is like when things aren't working, like we always kind of default to this idea that, well, if it's not working, then we just have to add something new. Let's just add to a program. Let's add something new. Let's get a better preacher. Let's do this. Let's do that. Let's add all of these different things. But in the end, those things aren't going to bring you about in what God has called you to do. It's you remaining consistent, remaining faithful in the calling. And that's what I want us to do. I want us to just pause for the next few weeks and think about the mission that God has called us to do specifically. Now, I don't beg people to come to church, but I'm begging you, like, you got to be here, okay? Now, this is encouraging. All of that I just said, not comparing, staying consistent, because in the end, that just means that we don't have to buy something new to make us look attractive. That just means we don't have to build another building. That frees the weight off of you that you don't have to get a better preacher. Please don't. I mean, kind of like this. That it frees us knowing that we don't have to just continue to draw back and punt. And yes, there are times for that in organizations and churches. Yes, please, fine-tune things, but we don't have to continuously do those things. All we have to do is to remain faithful in what God has called us to do as a body of believers. This mission to reach out, to welcome, and to move forward. If you think about that, those words, really it just rolls right out of Scripture. That's actually just God's mission and vision. So God's mission and vision, I can really just kind of summarize it in this one phrase, that God's mission, his vision, is about one thing only, himself. He doesn't like to make much of you. That's not in his MO. Right? His mission in life, his mission of his entire existence before time ever began, it wasn't just so he could say, I think I'm going to create this unique little individual. I'm going to make everything about him. His mission and his vision is about himself. He wants to make much of himself. That's his mission. Now, accompanying his mission, all right? So in the Bible, you see this narrative go through how God begins to use people. God begins to use people as his mouthpiece. God begins to use men and women to do about his work. So what God said, he's like, all right, here's my mission. I'm about myself, but I'm going to allow you to be a part of that mission and see to it that that mission comes to fruition. So in the New Testament, God breaks open the heavens and he comes down in flesh, and Jesus is right there. He ascends into heaven in Superman fashion, and then he brings his disciples up in an upper room. They're waiting there. Then the Holy Spirit comes down like tongues of fire, and all of a sudden what men were known as cowards came out as bold proclaimers of the gospel who are a part of fulfilling the mission of God. That mission and vision of God who is about himself includes a church. It includes you and I. That's God's vision and mission. It's about himself with the church helping him accomplish that mission. Now, we know God doesn't need our help. I mean, he created stuff. I mean, he spoke things into existence. But God wants to include us. And that should bring like some delight to our souls. That the weight doesn't all fall on you and I. The weight doesn't fall on all of us in this room. But you and I get to play games. We get to play along with the mission and vision of God. There's a passage that I want to talk about this morning. That was just my introductory remarks. But the rest of my sermon will be very short, I promise. In Exodus chapter 3. And I want to just kind of talk about our response to when God calls us and our response to when God births a vision and mission within our own life. In Exodus chapter 3, pretty common passage. I may have preached out of it a couple of times. You may have heard it in The Prince of Egypt or the Ten Commandments, and or that other terrible Moses movie that shouldn't have never been made. Let me talk about this for a second. I may read some of it in just a minute, but I want to just kind of narrate it if I can, because I'm running out of time. There's this guy named Moses, okay? Moses was brought up by Pharaoh and by the Egyptian people, just kind of counted him as one of them. One day Moses is out, and he, oppression is going on like never before, okay? Among the children of Israel. Moses witnesses one of the Egyptians, you all know the story, beating down a Jewish people, a Jewish person. Moses goes a little crazy, like something clicks in Moses, and so he just rips this guy with his bare hands and kills the Egyptian. Moses then flees for 40 years, all right? All right, here he is. He's like, what have I done? I don't know what he's thinking at this point, but, if you murder somebody, you got to be thinking something. Okay, like, what have I done? I just killed a guy. Not only did he kill him, he did it with his bare hands. All right, he didn't use no Glock, you know what I'm saying? The man. All right, I'm not saying killing people makes you a man. Please, if you just heard that, please don't hear that. In fact, just rewind and just forget I ever said that. But Moses, here he is, haunted by that, flees and goes out, works the farm, works the sheep, out there with his family for 40 years, quite sure haunted by the past that he has. Listen to me, haunted by that past. Here's the paradox of God's grace. God meets him in that mess, in that sin. God's not like, oh, you're unqualified because you killed that guy. God's grace finds him. I want to pick up the story because gets really crazy. In verse 2, the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire within a bush. I love this verse, it's so funny. As Moses looked, he saw that the bush was on fire, but not consumed. Moses thought, I must go over and look at this remarkable sight. Why isn't this bush burning? Because we all have like a fly nature. Go towards the light. You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm talking about? Nobody knows what I'm talking about. Never seen that movie before. Like there's just something like inside it, like we're intrigued by light, you know? Like, oh, cool, that's a light. What if I watch it for a really long time? What will happen to me? I'll go blind. You remember like when the sun photobombed was photobombed by the moon the other month? You remember that? We were intrigued by that. Like, protective eyewear. You know what I'm saying? We went all Trump and didn't care about protective eyewear and just started staring at that. Maybe what's wrong. Anyway, and so here's what happened. Moses is like, I got to go towards this light. This is really cool. And when the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called out to Moses from the bush and said, Moses, Moses. And Moses answered, here I am. Don't come any closer, because rightfully so, that bush ain't being consumed. But if Moses comes any closer, looks at the glory, the manifested glory of God, he's gone, right? Up in flames and ashes here. So God's warning him, don't come any closer. He said, remove your sandals from your feet. This is the place where you are standing is holy ground. Then he continued, I'm the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. Moses hid his face as he should have done, being in the all presence of Jesus Christ, because he was afraid to look at God. Then, yes, I did say Jesus Christ. Then the Lord said, I have observed the misery of my people in Egypt, and have heard them crying out because of their oppressors. I know about their sufferings. I've come down to rescue them from the power of the Egyptians and to bring them from that land to a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey. God here is laying out a vision and a mission, is what he's doing. He's laying out a plan for Moses. Territory of Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, Jebusites. That's great, it's done. So because the Israelites' cry for help has come to me, I have also seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. Now, pay attention to verse 10. You got to pay attention. God does not ask Moses to join in his mission. He demands it, and he says, I'm sending you. Isn't that interesting? That is what the glory of God does. Does it ask if we want to participate? No, his glory demands a response from us. His glory just kind of demanded it from the get-go. You're going. Don't you love how God doesn't really ask you to do anything? And if he does, it's not that he's looking for the answer. Hey, have you seen the sun and moon? Seemed like I've misplaced it. No, he's asking if you've seen the sun and moon, just so you can understand, yeah, I created the sun and the moon, so pay attention, boy. So if God's ever asking a question in the Bible, it ain't because God doesn't know the answer. He's asking so that you'll participate along with what he is about to tell you. But God does not even ask Moses. He tells Moses, Moses, I'm about to wire you, and I've already created you for this purpose, and I'm about to blow your mind by outlining this vision and mission that you will participate. And this vision and mission that God gives Moses, all Moses could do at this point was be like, all right, good. But notice his human response, though. Moses asked God, well, who am I that I should go to the Pharaoh and that I should bring the Israelites out of Egypt? Pay attention to verse 12, because he answered, I will certainly be with you, and this will be the sign to you that I am the one who sent you. When you bring the people out of Egypt, you will all worship God at this mountain. Notice how God responded. God did not talk about how awesome Moses was. Moses, because of your background, and because of how awesome and incredible you are in your ability, you shall lead these people out. Man, God knew that Moses was a wreck. He just killed somebody 40 years ago. He's hiding out. God knew Moses' inability, but he saw through that inability, and he gave him the confidence that he needed, because the confidence that Moses needed to respond to the vision wasn't found in his ability. It was found in God's power. So here we have God giving Moses a vision and a mission, and choosing to use this inadequate individual to be his mouthpiece. When God gives us a vision and a mission as a person of Christ, as a church, as a local community of believers, our response shouldn't be, well, I guess I don't want to do this, God. Our response should always be, yes, God, here I am. Despite what I've done in the past, despite what we've all done, our reckless lives that we've lived, the sin that we've brought into this room, God sees beyond that. He doesn't see about your ability. He's like, oh, let's check out your resume and see if it's awesome enough to participate in my mission and vision. God gives us the confidence that we need by telling us it's not your ability, it's my ability. That gives us confidence right there. Because if this church was built around my ability, God, people, it would be, if you just only get like a glimpse into my mind sometimes. It's crazy. I mean, I know you're like laughing, but I can kind of get a feel of some of your brains too. So don't act like this church would do any better if you were the guy leading it. I mean, come on, like think about it. In your ability, if you try to do something, how well does that work? Like there's been times in this church where I've been like, oh, I got this. And then God would like send like this scenario. I'm like, okay, God, I was wrong. I don't have this. Please help me. The moment you think that you have it, man, God will humble your tail. I almost said something like terrible right there. But God will humble you. The moment you think that, oh, I got this, Jesus, please. Man, come on. You can't even keep friends. You can't even keep your marriage well enough. I mean, come on. Let's really look at your life. But the great news, that's really good news, actually. I know you just feel like I just kicked you in the shin, but that's really incredible news, because despite that, God uses you, and he gives us his ability to be his mouthpiece. And so anytime God gives you a calling and purpose on your life, God will give you the confidence that you need, not because of your ability, but because of his ability. That's really good, because that should give us confidence in what God's called us to do here. That within a 10-mile radius of this church right here in downtown, there are 35,000 people. Think about that. It's okay if we say, hey, we want to reach 1,000 people. That's okay. It's not crazy. That is absurd even coming out of my mouth. And somebody's like, what? I've done the math on this, bro. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Dude, I've counted the chairs. Why not? Don't you think sometimes God may be offended by our small dreams and our small aspirations and our small visions that we have? God, if I can just reach one person. Brother, there's like thousands of them who are lost out there. Yes, reach the one. Please reach the one. But don't stop at the one. Don't be so limited to just a small dream, because I believe that God would be so grieved by small dreams and small visions that we have as a church. Church is like, well, if I could just live through this, and if everybody in this church grows old and dies and just give us their, inheritance, Jesus, we'll make a memorial for them. And that sounds comical. That's reality for a lot of churches. They've lost the vision that God has given them. And so they desire to stay on life support. And they're okay with that. God has called us for more. And then the other thing, and I'm about to close. I know some of you are looking at the time. When we say yes to God, here's the incredible part about the story of Moses, is that God's movement and activity was always with Moses. At times, didn't realize it. Times didn't really work out. I mean, all right. God brings the children of Israel out. And then into where? Have y'all not read the story? Into another wilderness. Not really, not sure how that story should have played out, but he led them to a wilderness. Yet despite the fact that they were in a wilderness, God never left them. God's movement and activity was always with them. And that's my earnest prayer, that when we say yes to God's call, when we say yes to God's mission and vision for this church, that God's movement and activity will always be with us. Cloud by day, fire by night, even in the wilderness. With the most strong and vile army pressing against the children of Israel with their backs against the sea, God exposes himself. He's like, I'm not leaving you, homies. I'm still here. I'm with you. My movement and activity isn't going to leave you just because some of you think that this is not the story that you thought that I was writing. So he parts water, and he's walking with them every step of the way in the wilderness. Friend, when we say yes to God's call, I promise you, God will always be with us. And we can't say in our future. I don't think that it's healthy for us to be at a point in the future where we say that we were always on the wrong side of history, where God's movement and activity was manifested. I want to be on the side of history when my kids grow old, when I am dead and gone. And when my children's children look back at what is happening here, they will say that God's movement and activity was always there. If my children grow old, if your children grow old, if my grandchildren grow old, and they look back at this moment in history and say, where was God at? Perhaps it was because we were off vision and mission. And we just, with our fists, said no to God. We can't afford to be on that side of history. Saying yes to God, saying yes to his vision and mission and purpose for your life, places us in the middle of God's activity, and that's where we have to be. So here's what I want to do. I want to pray for us, and I'm going to